There can be no society without a shared memory of its history, where it has been, what are its core values and aspirations, who have been its architects. The Eminent Caribbean Jurists Awards was conceptualized in 2019 to recognize and celebrate those outstanding jurists who, by dint of their brilliance, hard work, and determination, have made a consequential contribution to Caribbean society. The 2021 installation of these awards pays homage to pioneering Caribbean women jurists who have built and are building the Caribbean society through their contributions to legal activism, adjudication, corporate governance, education, politics, and public service. These are women who have shattered glass ceilings and who have blazed an inspirational trail for the younger generation and indeed for all of us to follow.
Was an attorney at law who held the status of senior counsel. A former independent senator in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, she dedicated her life in service to her country. Fearless and independent, Dana was a brilliant advocate, state prosecutor, law lecturer, author, and newspaper columnist. Among a group of distinguished alumni awardees of the University of the West Indies, Dana was also a Fulbright scholar who focused on criminal justice reform. Sadly, in 2014, she was assassinated. Even those who did not know her felt her influence through her writing as a columnist. Dana Sitahal dared greatly in every facet of life.
I think in childhood there were several instances which made her aware of the fact that things were not always fair. She experienced a situation with her grandfather who had to sell his land to pay lawyers' fees. And I think in her mind, he didn't get proper representation. It also encouraged her to be, I believe, outspoken and speak out when she saw things were not going the right way. So she, at a young age, was determined to put herself in a position so that she could offer meaningful help to the people around her, you know, similar humble backgrounds. And she worked to support herself to university. So there was a lot of sacrifice in order to achieve her goals. And she saw law as the way to achieve those goals, which is basically to what people say, she was a voice for those who did not have a voice. A lot of her work going forward was pro bono, and I think, which is legal aid and doing work for minimal fees. And that the roots of that started, I believe, the foundation was laid in her childhood when she saw how persons who had less knowledge, less information, less resources were not in the best position that they could be in to help themselves.
Well, Dana and I were great friends. As you can imagine, we were the only two women in the Port of Spain office. After a number of years, two others joined us, Ingrid White-Wilson and Nanette Ford John, who is now our magistrate. And Dana was the leader of the pack, so to speak. A great sense of humor. She eventually became a mentor to others coming in. In fact, one particular person, they used to call her the Oracle. So if you wanted to know anything, find out from Dana. Dana had an opinion about everything, And she was not shy to share it. She didn't insist that her way was right. But, as I say, she always had an opinion.
She would practice law as a means of sharing her knowledge, firstly, I think. And that's where her articles come in. She wrote those articles often on current legal affairs, matters that the public was interested in. So she provided them insight into the law, and of course her opinion was also there. So it was about sharing her knowledge through those articles, teaching at the law school, again imparting her legal knowledge. Her book, in fact, was written because students were continuously asking her questions, which she didn't have time to do during regular classes, as well as to provide guidance for other practitioners.
Then I was fearless, a pint-sized dynamo. And she was one of those who, while I was already quite bold in my own right, taught me, no, don't take any nonsense from anybody, be it counsel on the other side, or witness, or police prosecutor. Stand up for yourself. And so she was a very lovely person to work with, the quintessential colleague. Dana would put down whatever she was doing to assist you. So that when she went on in her career into private practice and then as a senator, making sterling contributions there, particularly in the field of criminal law, in which of course she had great experience, it was no surprise to anyone. Dana was on a trajectory that was obvious to all.
Shirley Miller. Brilliant, excellent, and pioneering are words that come to mind when the name Shirley Miller is mentioned. She began her career in the public legal service in Jamaica in 1963. At that time, women in the legal profession were few in number. Shirley quickly earned a reputation for her intellectual depth and high standard of performance, which remained evident throughout her long and distinguished legal career. Resisting the lure of a more lucrative private practice, she spent her entire career in the public service. The impact of her contribution in the field of law extends beyond Jamaica to the wider Commonwealth jurisdictions.
Yes, and I tell you, I know she feels honored, and I also have some vicariously I feel honored on her behalf. Because, you know, as one of our colleagues often said, people who do that kind of work in the shadows. It is very important foundation work, but it is not recognized by everyone. Nobody realizes that the laws and all these cases and the jurisprudence that is developed therefrom has its roots in that sort of foundation work. And so I think it is such a good thing, it is laudable that the CCJ Academy has seen it fit to honor Shirley Miller. And for this to be recorded for posterity, because it will not only publicize her work for everyone to see, but it also serves as a motivation to others to see what can be done. And remember, when she was working in this field, you know, there weren't as many female lawyers as there are now. So in many ways, all those who follow stand on her shoulders, and persons like her, Mrs. Ina Collymore Woodstock included.
The epitome of the iron glove in a satin, iron fist in a satin glove. Very mild-mannered, very soft-spoken, but very firm and strong. I'm not sure if I should put this in the interview, but she was the one we feared as a child, not my father. But she only had to speak. Once. Well, I'll put it simply, she never worked in private practice where she could have earned significant amounts of money. She did most, if not all, of her education on government scholarships, and all her entire working world. She's always been, apart from a few events with the Spanish, everything she has done has been with dedicated towards government service. She could have made a significant amount of money in private practice. So that was her, her upbringing to serve, provide service. It's kind of passed on to all of us.
Oh, there's so many things I'd want to say. I wouldn't even know where to start. For me, she's my mom, and she's been no, it's true, she's my mom. And one of the things that I took for granted growing up, because it was what it was, but as an adult, I really understand in a different way, is that I never thought there was anything I couldn't do, because it was normal in my household to do what needed to be done, and it didn't matter that you were a man or a woman. There was nothing that it occurred to me that I was banned from doing. And that, I think, is thanks to my mother, who never complained about the issues she would have faced in any environment. When she went to England to do law, there's this black lady in this world where she would be out of the norm. Right back to coming back here and just doing what she had to do. She would travel to do whatever needed to be done. She'd be here to do what needed to be done. But it never spoke of all the difficulties because I'm a woman, and she just did it. And so it never occurred to me that I couldn't. So that's what I would like to say. Yeah. No, yeah. Anything more? You don't want to say anything? I'll tell you something, I think she's almost overwhelmed by this honorary award. Because as I said, she's very modest. So if you don't say what she's done, you won't hear it out of her mouth, other than just cold facts. Oh, I did this, but you won't hear it no more. That's mom.
Well, I'm told that at that time, when she graduated from high school, Shirley, that is, graduated from high school, Enoch Collymore Woodstock was a resident magistrate, as they were then called. They are now called parish judges. But she was a resident magistrate assigned to the court in that parish of St. Mary. And her parents were very much impressed with Mrs. Collymore Woodstock. At that time, you must understand, there were very few females in the profession. And so she stood out. And her parents thought that this was a good role model for our daughter. Of course, they were confident in her ability to undertake the studies. And she had the necessary financial support because she had won the Jamaica Centenary Scholarship. So the die was cast. And Shirley set off to London, and the rest is history. Well, I should be honest and say most of it that I wrote was from my own experience and information that I had to date. But I did get some details that I was not privy to prior to doing this essay. I did pay quite a few visits here, and I spoke with her. One that stood out in my mind was the fact that after she had got the results from her second year law exams, she had got up very early, herself and her husband. He was not then her husband, he was just her friend. But in anxiety to get the results, which were published in the newspaper, they got up early in the morning, went out to Fleet Street and combed the newspaper, searched through the names which were listed in alphabetical order for her name, and they could not find her name. She said the first thing that occurred to her was, oh my God, imagine I've wasted the Jamaican taxpayers' money. I have not passed. But in truth, she had done so well that her name was on a separate list with the other persons who were prize winners, and she had got the first place. So that was a detail that I didn't know before. And also the fact that Norman Manley was visiting London at the time, and he had come around to congratulate her. She had established herself, and of course, she joined the department after the Attorney General's department after her return to Jamaica in 1971. And she distinguished herself. She was promoted very quickly and went through the ranks, right up to director, the head of a department, one of the divisional sections there in the Attorney General's department. And she was a very brilliant advocate. She was in charge of a number of projects, also supervised lawyers in every area of law. She was well respected, well sought after, and in fact, she had the distinction of being appointed to call to the inner bar, I think in 1971. But she was the first female Queen's Counsel. Nearly all, if not all, major legislative reforms that were introduced during her tenure. She retired in 1997, I think. Major legislative reforms that were undertaken bore her stamp. In many instances, from the conceptualization right up to the passage of the law in Parliament, Shirley's stamp was there. In the area of family law, I can recall Status of Children Act, Matrimonial Causes Act, New Divorce Reform, Married Woman Property, Criminal Law, Mutual Legal Assistance, not to mention Constitutional Law, an area which she carried with her even after her formal retirement, and it's made a sterling contribution on a special constitutional committee that advised and informed the development of the recent Charter of Rights. And to see that, you know, not only was she brilliant at work, but she was also brilliant in terms of the relationships, both domestic and otherwise, that she was able to forge. And, you know, the varied contribution that she was able to make to society on a whole. And not only limited to Jamaica, I should add, but also internationally, because she participated fully in a number of activities. I remember the Commonwealth Secretariat regarded her as a resource and would very often seek her advice, not only on the law in Jamaica, but also the law in other jurisdictions. And she was sought out after also to sit on various committees developing law reform. And so I think that her contribution to the legal landscape extends beyond Jamaica to the wider world. And as I said before, I'm so happy that she's honored at a time that she is able to appreciate that this is being done. So thank you again very much for this opportunity, and thanks to the CCJ Academy.
Gladys Ramsaran. Gladys Ramsaran of British Guyana was the first woman to be admitted to the bar in Trinidad and Tobago. Along with her husband Victor, also a barrister, she sailed from London to Trinidad, making headlines even before her arrival. On January 5, 1932, Gladys and Victor Ramsaran were admitted to the bar. They established a legal practice in South Trinidad, and Gladys independently undertook high-profile criminal cases, which on occasion earned her regional attention. By 1948, Gladys earned another first when she was appointed as the first woman magistrate in Trinidad and Tobago, a position she held until her retirement in 1970.
Well, 1932 is extremely early. It's only 2 years after the first woman to be admitted to the bar in the entire English-speaking Caribbean, Iris de Freitas Brazel, was admitted. It's only a few short years since women in Britain were able to qualify and be called to the bar. So it is remarkably early, and it was a big event, and the media in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean generally covered her ceremony for admission. It was very early. She was a genuine pioneer. The impact she made was first and foremost by being appointed, a woman being appointed to the lower judiciary in 1948. This was very new. She was certainly the first in Trinidad. She may have been the first in the entire English-speaking Caribbean, because this was not a time when women held high positions in the judiciary or the civil service or anywhere. So that was her main importance. In terms of what she did as magistrate, she paid particular attention to issues connected to children and young people and issues connected to juvenile delinquency and so on. So I think she made a big contribution in that field, and we're talking about the late 1940s and into the 50s, very early. The law and the judiciary are still a male-dominated profession, notwithstanding the brilliant achievements of the women we document. And I think it's important to inspire our young people, yes, particularly our girls and young women, but young men too, to see that these women, many, I would say most of whom, came from humble circumstances. The essays detail that. Some of whom were born in the tiniest islands you can imagine, Anguilla, Virgin Gorda, places you may not even be able to find on the map, and yet were able, through sacrifice and brilliance and hard work and family support, were able to qualify as lawyers and rise in their respective field, not all to become magistrates and judges, as you know, some to contribute in other spheres. So I think documenting it, most of these women are not household names by any means. So we think that the documenting is important and the inspiring is important too.
Daisy Lucille Chambers. Born in 1906 in the parish of Manchester, Jamaica, Daisy Chambers started her working life as a teacher at her alma mater Walmer School for Girls in Kingston. With big dreams and ambitions, Daisy was confronted with legal restrictions placed upon women at that time. Undaunted, in 1930, she began working as a solicitor's clerk until November 1944, when Jamaica was granted full adult suffrage, allowing women to enter the legal profession. Daisy studied and worked hard to prove that she was worthy of admission to the esteemed legal profession, and in 1948, proposed by Norman Manley, Jamaica's first premier, she was admitted to practice law as the first woman solicitor in Jamaica. In 1964, joined by her younger sister, the law firm of Chambers and Bunny became the first to be run solely by women. On July 30th, 1993, Daisy Lucille Chambers was honored by the Jamaican Bar Association for her contribution to the legal profession. Some months later, she passed on after a long and satisfying life, spending well over 40 years doing what she truly loved, being a true and loyal servant of the law.
As I had indicated, she had worked with Mr. Nethersole until 1956, when she started her own practice as Daisy Chambers solicitor. Eventually, her sister, Hazel Bunny, became articled to her. When I was admitted to practice in 1971, probably 2 years after the firm became Chambers, Bunny and Steer, so it lost the flavor of being an all-woman firm, and I verily believe it was the first female firm. There were other women practicing, but either by themselves or with firms with males. She did a lot to be where she is now, or where she was. Remembering that in her time, women could not become doctors, lawyers, or take part in any of what the male people call the preferred professions. There had to be seamstresses, typists, and teachers, and those things. So she was a very, very ambitious lady, all 5 feet 2 inches of her. Her personality was, as a solicitor, feisty, strong, and would fight in court any of her male counterparts. Because in those days, a solicitor couldn't practice in the Supreme Court. They could only practice in the parish court. Well, first of all, in those days, you had barristers and solicitors. The barristers would have to journey to England and read for the bar at one of the inns of court there. Solicitors were allowed to become articled, and you either had to have the subjects from the, I don't know what it was in those days, higher school certificate, whatever it was in those days, or you had to take they had a preliminary exam that you could take to become an article clerk. Although in 1972, the professions were fused. But by that time, she was sending me to the Supreme Court to do our work, the firm's work. I'm told that at one time she was the #1 family lawyer in Jamaica. However, not being able to go to court, the Supreme Court, but she had quite a bit of the family law business. And she was hard but fair. When she died, she would have been 87 in the November. And I was taking her to work up until maybe April or May of that year. And what stopped her from working was her illness. Law was her life. Up to the year she died, she was taking home work. Her brain was fabulous. I don't know if I plan to be around practicing that long.
Dame Bernice Lake. Anguillan-born jurist and legal scholar Dame Bernice Lake enjoyed a career which spanned more than 40 years. Part of the team which drafted the Antigua and Barbuda Constitution in 1981, by 1985 Dame Bernice became the first woman from the Eastern Caribbean to be appointed Queen's Counsel, and the first graduate of the University of the West Indies to receive this honor. In 2019, she was among 12 pioneering women honored by University College London and described as someone whose extraordinary contribution to constitutionalism in her region and to the protection of human rights and women's rights marks her as an outstanding example, not only of a UCL female first, but of a woman committed to the ongoing struggle for equality for all.
It was quite, I have to say, fulfilling to have had the opportunity to go back down memory lane in a lot of respects and recreate the memories, the stories that we grew up being told as children by our aunts and uncles or sisters, by my grandmother, my grandfather, and then with her narrating her own experiences of her childhood, it brought back a lot, because it reminded me where we came from and how far we had come as a family and even as a community. So it was like a regeneration of the spirit and a reconnection with the past, bringing it into the future, and very much bringing her, now deceased, bringing her back alive for me in a very poignant way. I definitely felt a deep sense of gratitude for those who had considered and put her on the awardees list and finally chosen her. Because I felt that she was somebody who stood out in terms of what she fought for, what she represented in her communities in Anguilla, in St. Kitts, in Antigua. And as a Caribbean national and a Caribbean woman, I thought that, yes, it was satisfying, very much so. Her interest in educating, because that was a very deep part of what she represented, in knowing that you put yourself out there and you seize the opportunities that were there. So that was inculcated in us, and that position gave her the opportunity to translate it now to others. And she would recount her experiences of taking, and I have to say, because of her social justice element, she herself would recount that she had, while she was egalitarian in spirit, she would have a particular affinity and take under her wings those students who had the opportunity to come into the grammar school from the sections of the community, and in those days it was the rare student or students, and take them under her wing and groom them, because this was she saw herself in them and she wanted to bring out the best in them. Dame Bernice learned the craft, which she carried into her career, to be very careful with every word that she uttered. And words, she believed words were your craft. In whatever setting you found yourself, words were your craft. You were a diplomat, and I believe, and if you could not use the English language to your best advantage, then you were failing. And I think the diplomatic service gave her that grounding, that sense of rootedness in craftsmanship, and how to approach people and how to deal with people at all levels. And she was a good craftsman at that. Perhaps the best way to describe her in that regard, her passion for mentorship, or for grooming the individual. She saw you as a raw material. You may have gone to university, you may have got your degrees, as I did as her niece. I had done a first degree. I taught, and then I went off to do law. I came back, and here was I thinking that, well, I had accomplished something, and that could be credited. Well, I was soon to discover that in my aunt's view, I was simply raw material. I was potentially an asset, but that asset had to be shaped. So she took the raw material as a mentor. She took that raw material and she bent you, she shaped you, she molded you. So I'll just give you a one short illustration and to make the point. So having had 2 degrees, I thought that my writing skills, my thinking skills, my presentation was up to snuff. Given my legal assignments on any matter, I soon learned, to my utter despair, and there was despair, that I would get everything back, and it would look, in those days we did not initially have the computers, and everything looked like a Christmas tree because there was red all over it. And I was told, unsatisfactory, go back, my style, my language, my use of language, I was using too many words. So you have to be honed, and if you were not prepared to be honed and molded, not to be who she was, but to be the best of who you could be, then I'm afraid the next step was she would say, pass on, because I don't have time to waste time for somebody who's not appreciating that they have a talent and it has to be honed. That is who she was in her mentorship. She wanted to bring out the best in every associate, in her legal staff, and in the attorneys whom she would be sitting in court and watching them stumble. And she would be there to help them and reach out to them and say, no, you're stumbling. And she goes so far as to perhaps after the court case, call them to her office and says, no, here is where you went wrong. And for her, preparation was key. And preparation did not mean just spending the hours. It meant putting in the time and producing the results. She was results oriented. So in her mentorship, the result was that you had to be the best you could be. And that was success for her. Her doors were open to anyone from any walk of life. And in particular, those who could not afford the money to represent themselves. If you had a cause, money was of no moment. She was there to fight for you tooth and nail against the police, against the state, against big corporations. This was part of the life work, the way she dedicated herself to bringing in this respect, leveling that playing field and letting people know that, but you have a voice. I am your voice, and I will litigate for you, and I will bring the result for you. And she translated that also into her social activism through her writings and her speeches. So yes, her law practice, it was there that she spread her wings, and her success was built on the foundation that there was access to justice in her chambers for all. She made no distinctions. Matter of fact, she imbibed in me the view that once the client stepped into your office, here was the relationship. You had an obligation to give every ounce of yourself to that client, and in return, the client, if it was not a pro bono matter, had an obligation to pay. But it was imbibed. As a young attorney, the pay was not your first order of business. It was striving for excellence and building a reputation. That was your first order of business. That is how she practiced the law, and that is how she mentored. The legacy that she carved out has not been forgotten. People remember her imprint in the landscape. She's quoted often. And I think to just encapsulate it, the fact that in Anguilla, the Anguilla Bar Association not just honored her, but set up a scholarship for the most outstanding student in the KFL campus in constitutional law, and gave a bursary, annual bursary towards that. Speaks also to that legacy. In me, I've tried to keep that legacy alive, and her influence on many attorneys, especially in the constitutional landscape, have driven the appreciation and the determination to fight when that constitutional issue arose, and not just to yield and to bow to the pressures of the state, which were real and are real on constitutional matters. And I think we've seen that flourishing. I will cite in particular Antigua and Anguilla, because those were the two areas where she, in terms of those battles, Those were her battlegrounds and successful battlegrounds. So her legacy is very much alive. It is remembered, it is quoted, it is referred to, and very much appreciated.